You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl, and we're taking a look at Egypt's presidential elections. Egyptians have finished voting in the initial round of the country's first free presidential ballot, a big step forward in the country's messy transition to democracy. Initial and unofficial results point to two candidates going through to the second round next month, and neither of them is perfect. The first is Mohammed Morsi, a Muslim Brotherhood candidate who wasn't the well-organized Islamist group's first choice. The second is Ahmed Shafiq, a former Air Force chief who is tainted by being the last prime minister of the toppled leader Hosni Mubarak. Both men are controversial and could lead to further protests on the streets of the country after the runoff vote on the 16th and 17th of June. So, 15 months after Mubarak's fall, is Egypt moving in the right direction? How do we rate this latest episode in Egypt's revolutionary struggle? And what of the two lead candidates and the direction they will take the country in? To probe these questions, we're hosting a discussion in our London studio. I'm joined by Dareen Khalifa, a rights campaigner, Ian Black, the Middle East editor for The Guardian, over the line from Cairo, Mostafa Ragab, director of the community centre Egyptian House London, and over the line from Moscow by Mikhail Roshin, a research fellow at the Russian Academy of Sciences. Turning to you first, Ian Black from The Guardian, because you are, of course, our man at the scene in Cairo. Maybe we could start with the good news. Is there a sense of pride in Cairo today that Egyptians have won the right to choose their leader?
There's certainly been a sense of pride and excitement about the presidential election. The first time ever that Egyptians have chosen a leader without knowing in advance what the result would be. That's an extraordinary achievement. After 60 years of the Republic, there was a genuine choice. It's really a landmark event for Egypt. It's the largest of all the Arab countries. And of course, this has been a significant moment in the wider phenomenon of what we call the Arab Spring. Things that were unimaginable a year and a half ago are happening now. So there was pride and excitement about the election. But the result of the first round of this election has, I think, given a lot of people pause for thought, and it's a very polarized result. I think there's quite a lot of concern about what it means, concern from people who supported the revolution about the achievements that they had hoped to maintain and to develop, and concern about the way in which the outcome reflects very, very profound divisions in Egyptian society. So yes, it was a great thing to have this free election, and it was largely peaceful and largely fair, without doubt. But the result, I think, is in some ways really quite problematic and raises some difficult questions about the future.
OK, thank you. We'll get on to all of those, and maybe I'll turn it to my guests in the studio, because we're lucky enough to have two Egyptians here in the studio, both of whom have voted in the elections. I'll turn to you, Mustafa. Let me read you a quote from one of your countrymen over in Cairo. This is just an ordinary state employee, 40-year-old Ahmed Kamal. He said, "We didn't know what the word elections meant in the era of Hosni Mubarak. Ian Black described it as unimaginable, a great result of the Arab Spring." Do you have a sense of pride and also this sense of concern and fear that Ian was referring to?
Absolutely, a sense of pride that we were allowed to vote as Egyptians, and especially Egyptian abroad, because we didn't have any part to play in Egyptian politics before. And of course, Egypt going through a historic moment at the moment. People are going to start to learn how to deal with these issues and how to vote, because I'm looking at the Egyptian people back in Egypt that needs a lot of awareness campaign, because to have the Muslim Brotherhood in control of the streets of Cairo, that is giving Morsi, the unknown man, to us or to a lot of people, the lead at the moment. And that shows you that there need to be a lot of awareness campaigns in Cairo for people how to vote.
Dareen Khalifa, also Egyptian, also in the studio. What are your feelings about what's been happening over the last 48 hours?
I've been working on human rights for a couple of years now, and seeing this huge political mobilization in Egypt was like a dream come true for me. Seeing this huge sense of engagement, this political debate, this very sophisticated arguments going on in the streets of Cairo, everywhere. Everyone is talking about politics. Everyone is trying to have a say in their future. This is amazing. But I think most Egyptians have this pride combined with fear, with a huge sense of frustration, of the process and how the army intervened in every step of the process, how the Muslim Brotherhood let the protesters and let the revolutionaries down on lots of occasions.
Maybe I'll turn to you now, Mikhail. What's the view from Moscow? Let me read you out, first of all, one other quote from another Egyptian on the street. This is Saad Abud Rabo. He works for the Education Ministry. He's in his mid-50s and he was voting in Alexandria. He said, "Our vote will make Egypt's voice in the Arab world ring loud and clear. For 30 years, Egypt's voice was muted." Mikhail, is it seen from Moscow as an historic moment for Egyptians?
Yes, I think this is really a historical moment for Egyptian people, for Egypt, and I think also for the Arab world as a whole. Because I think this the first presidential elections, free presidential elections, so I would say that this is very important moment for Arab world.
And turning back to you, Ian, in Cairo at the moment, you spoke obviously about it being a historic moment, but you also said that the results pose problems for the future, possible controversies. Here's an interesting fact. We're talking about these two candidates, Mohamed Morsi and Ahmed Shafiq, as if they're the two lead candidates. How sure are we at this stage that those are going to be the two guys that go ahead in the runoff next month?
Well, I think you're absolutely right to raise that point. It's not certain, and the results are not final and not official. However, we have to listen to what people are saying, and the Muslim Brotherhood, from within an hour or two at the most of the polls closing last night, were saying that Morsi was in the lead and that Morsi was going to go through to the second round. And nobody really seems to question that. The idea that the second contender will be Ahmed Shafiq is also taking root. I think that's slightly less certain according to the latest figures, and they're changing all the time and emerging all the time from thousands and thousands of different voting areas. Another candidate is quite close to Shafiq. He's an interesting one. He's Hamdin Sabahi, who's an independent Nasserist figure who inspires a sort of nostalgia for the glory days of the first Egyptian revolution in the 1950s, if you like, and has attracted a tremendous following. So it is possible, though no more than that this may yet change. But I think what's unlikely to change is the commanding lead for Mohamed Morsi, who's the candidate, of course, for the Freedom and Justice Party, which represents the Muslim Brotherhood. It's true that if the contest turned out to be between Morsi and Ahmed Shafiq, that would be the most polarized outcome, but it would also be a sort of an extreme outcome to have Morsi versus Sabahi. It would pose difficult questions for many Egyptians as to who to vote for. I think Sabahi would be an easier candidate for people who support the revolution, because many of those who oppose the Islamists, who are against the Muslim Brotherhood, say that they couldn't, even holding their noses, as it were, back Shafiq, who they see in a very, very pejorative sense, they say in Arabic as fulul, a remnant, a leftover of the old regime. That, for many people, would be simply an impossible choice, and I think you'd see very large-scale abstentions. So you're right, it's not certain yet, but I think that we can be fairly certain that Morsi, who heads the most important and the best organized political movement in Egypt, an Islamist movement, is going to be competing in the final round.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl, and we're taking a look at Egypt's presidential elections. I'm joined by Dareen Khalifa, a rights campaigner, Ian Black, Middle East editor for The Guardian over the line from Cairo, Mostafa Ragab, director of the community centre Egyptian House London, and Mikhail Roshin, a research fellow at the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. Back to the studio, Mostafa. These two candidates that we're talking about as being the most likely, Ahmed Shafiq, an ex-Air Force chief. He was serving as Hosni Mubarak's last prime minister when Mubarak was deposed. Why do you think Egyptians have gone back to the past?
I think they all played a lot of election tricks, and Ahmed Shafiq have said or addressed the Egyptian people with what they want to hear. That he said he's going to restore security in 24 hours if he's elected as president. And this is a very, very important issue to the Egyptian people who suffered for over a year now from a lot of trouble on the streets of Egypt. So this is maybe one issue that people voted for him, as he said he was going to restore security in 24 hours. don't know what magic stick has he got to restore security in 24 hours. But I think it's a very, very early results what we're looking at, because if we have 50% of the 50 million who are allowed to vote are voting, so we're looking at 25 million. 25 million, we haven't got anything near the 50% of them yet. So we're looking at a very early results there, and things could change when you go to the rest of the towns in Egypt. But there is no doubt, and I can tell you that from now, there is no doubt that the Muslim Brotherhood will win this election. If there will be a second round, it may be Hamdin Sabahi or Futuh. I wouldn't expect Shafiq to be among the second round, because we still, as I said, looking at a lot of results. I must say that most of the candidates have managed to confuse the Egyptian people with their election campaign. They all have made a lot of promises, and every day they were changing their promises. So people in Egypt were really confused with this campaign. Also, myself personally, I can't see the ideal leader or the ideal president among all those candidates. But we have, at the end of the day, to choose the best out of the worst selection that we have. And I think this is, a lot of Egyptians share these views with me, especially here in London.
You're saying that when it comes to the runoff vote next month, you think it's going to go to Morsi?
Definitely. Take that from me.
Does anybody think otherwise, or does anybody at the very least think that isn't 100% guaranteed?
Well, nothing is 100% guaranteed. There's certainly the ability of the Brotherhood to bounce back from a sense in recent weeks that they were losing popularity does attest to a remarkable ability to organize and to mobilize. And this is still the best known and the best organized political movement in Egypt. Egypt is a conservative Muslim country. The Muslim Brotherhood is not the same as it was 50 or 60 years ago. It's much more aware of how to conduct itself in a multi-party political system. It's got quite a long way to go, because, of course, such a system never existed until the overthrow of Mubarak last year. But I'm inclined to agree that I think that if you were to say who is most likely to win the Egyptian presidential election when it goes to a second round next month, it is pretty likely to be Mohamed Morsi.
What we're talking about here, that maybe the Muslim Brotherhood lost grounds in Cairo, El Giza, Alexandria, but the Muslim Brotherhood are definitely in control of the rest of the country. And Morsi, if he was standing as an independent candidate, he would never have anything like he's getting now. So the Muslim Brotherhood are definitely in control, and we have to look at the reality. They're going to win the election with Morsi.
Dareen, do you think that's fair? Do you think Mohamed Morsi wouldn't have done so well if he wasn't part of the Brotherhood? I noticed until recently he was being mocked as the Brotherhood's uncharismatic spare tyre. He was pulled into the race after the Brotherhood's first choice candidate was disqualified.
I agree. Morsi wouldn't have a chance if he was running independently. I think any close follower to Egyptian politics would have anticipated this, but most of the people are surprised because they just undermine the huge ability of the Brotherhood to mobilize people. And they just proved that whomever they're going to nominate is going to win. So if it's Morsi this time, and if it is a Shatter next time, or whomsoever, they are going to win. And I honestly don't think that's a free process in the sense of the wider definition of having a free elections, because they are using not so free methods to mobilize people. They are playing on the lack of social services of the country. They're playing on the non-existence of the state, the gap that the state has created during the Mubarak regime. And they are also playing so hard on the lack of security. So I don't think that was a free process.
You're saying they're playing on these issues, but you're a human rights campaigner. Egyptians have won the right to vote. They've exercised their vote. You're not saying that the elections themselves are not fair. You just don't like the outcome.
No, it's not that I don't like the outcome. I don't like the process itself. The counting is fair. I'm not questioning the counting process. I'm just saying that a lot of Egyptians went to the ballot boxes out of intimidation, either out of intimidated by the lack of security, or by the lack of food, or by the fear of Islamic extremism. And that goes back to your question, why Egyptians went back to voting for Ahmed Shafiq, knowing that he's a Falul or he's a remittance. It's the fact that they are scared. The Coptic Church announced unofficially several times that they are supporting Ahmed Shafiq because they are extremely intimidated, and I would say they are threatened in a way of religious extremism in the country. So I don't think that is a free process by any means.
Okay, Mikhail, turning to you in Moscow, what do you think about this? Because there is a case to be made that the Islamists are going to have not necessarily an unfair amount of influence in Egyptian politics, but at least a very strong monopoly of the ruling institutions. They're going to have the biggest bloc in parliament. It's plausible from what we're saying here that they're going to have the presidency as well. If you put together the Muslim Brotherhood and the ultra-Orthodox Salafi Islamist movement, that's 70% of the parliamentary seats that have been won in the elections. That's quite a big stranglehold on Egyptian politics, no?
Yes, I think this will be a big challenge if Mohamed Morsi will win this presidential election, and this more or less is evident even if he will win in the second tour. And of course his party and also Salafists, they could change Egyptian constitution, which is now rather secular, I would say, and they will form a new Islamic constitution. So I think this is a real danger, I would say, not only for Egypt but also for other Islamic countries. And I think this might also compromise in future the tourism in Egypt.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl, and we're taking a look at Egypt's presidential elections. I'm joined by Dareen Khalifa, a human rights campaigner, Ian Black, the Middle East editor for The Guardian over the line from Cairo, Mostafa Ragab, director of the Community Centre Egyptian House London, and Mikhail Roshin, a research fellow at the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. Turning back to you, Ian, there were some concerns being raised there, both by Dareen and Mikhail, about what happens if the Muslim Brotherhood has the monopoly of power on the political life of Egypt. Obviously, this is a concern for secularists and Christians. How realistic do you think these fears are?
The results of the vote show that this is a very deeply divided country. Liberal and secular Egyptians do worry about the Muslim Brotherhood. They worry about its conservative social agenda in particular. They worry about a tradition of authoritarianism, at least within the organization. And they worry about the divisiveness that it could bring to an already divided society. They worry, I think, also that it's one thing to be the most powerful political movement in the country, but when they have had no experience of ever running anything in the country, then the question of experience and expertise is highly relevant. You know, the famous old solution of the Muslim Brotherhood, not just in Egypt but everywhere, is that Islam is the solution. They used to say, well, clearly dealing with all the challenges facing a modern country and an economy and a society which suffers from huge problems of underdevelopment, of illiteracy is a great problem in Egypt and so on, then there are questions about its competence, its ability to run a government. And you rightly make the point about the concern about it monopolizing everything. In the Mubarak era, when the Muslim Brotherhood competed only as independents, by the way, in Parliament, it was always quite careful not to field too many candidates. There was a sense that it didn't want to, even if it felt it was popular and could win a lot of power, it didn't want to do too much. And that has been reversed in the parliamentary elections earlier this year. They captured almost half the seats. Others were taken by Salafis, who are a more hardline Islamist group. They were accused of trying to pack the body writing Egypt's new constitution. And they said that they weren't going to field a candidate for the presidency. And then they did. And now it looks as if they're going to win it. So all that explains, I think, why there's a lot of anxiety from secular liberal Egyptians and from the Christian community about their rise. I think it's understandable. There's real dismay, and there's a lot of soul searching, I think, in the other camp as to how this was able to happen.
Mustafa, let me read you out an example of the dismay that Ian is talking about. This is a quote from a 52-year-old engineer in Cairo, Mohammed Mustafa. He says, "The Brotherhood are obsessed with women and Israel. The first thing they did was to change the laws to restrict women's freedom. If the Brotherhood win, we will go backwards 50 years. What do you think about that? And what do you think about the concerns that Ian raised, that there is great concern over their conservative ideology, and also whether or not the Brotherhood actually has the skills to govern effectively?"
I will question that if they have the skills, but then time will show. But they're going to win the election, and the country could go in one of two directions. Either the Muslim Brotherhood will want to prove to the world that they're not as everyone think, and they will start to change their image and they start to go the right way. Or the other voice of some members of the Muslim Brotherhood who calling for all these changes with under control and all these issues and all the rules that they try to pass through the Egyptian parliament lately. If they win, then I'm very, very concerned. It depends what direction we're going to go with the Muslim Brotherhood. But let me tell you that the Muslim Brotherhood have obtained the power from the last regimes, not the last regime only, the last regimes, because the Egyptian, or most of the Egyptian, lived in poverty, and the Muslim Brotherhood were offering this community help to people, represented in food and medicine and helping people on the ground. So they looked to the people who live in the poor areas as the help or the alternative to the regimes. Also, there were no opposition for the old regime, and the Muslim Brotherhood to the Egyptian represented this opposition. That is why they are in power and they are in control now. But I think these things have finished now, and we're going to go through a new era, and the people in Egypt were going to start to learn. We're going to go to nursery, really, to learn politics, and the people are going to start to learn. I'm looking at least 2 terms of election before Egypt settle down. Don't expect Egypt to get the right president now or the right president in the next election. I'll be looking for 2 terms before Egypt settle down.
Can I turn to you there, Dareen? What do you think about that? I've noticed from most of your comments, you've obviously got a secular perspective. And the Arab Spring of revolutions started out about inequality, job opportunities, unemployment for young people, and authoritarian rule. Also look quite secular in nature. Here we are, 15 months after the fall of Mubarak. Are you surprised with what you're seeing now in Egypt? And what would you like to see happen over the next few years?
When you were talking about how the liberals and seculars in Egypt are really afraid and scared of the social conservative agenda of the Brotherhood, I think the quote that you mentioned was right, that they have some sort of obsession with the patriarchal system and repressing women and so on. They don't focus that much on Israel. They've made it clear several times that they're going to uphold the peace treaty. I don't think they are going to do anything against that.
Doesn't Morsi stand for reviewing the peace treaty, the 1979 peace treaty with Israel?
Whatever that means, I think that's very vague, but I think they're very good politicians. I think they have outstanding relations with the U.S., and they've made it clear several times that they're going to maintain good relations with Israel. However, I think the main fear of the secularists in Egypt is the authoritarian inherited nature of the Brotherhood. They've made it clear several times since the revolution, since the step down of Mubarak, that they are willing to turn a blind eye on human rights violations done by the army. They've been giving such a hard time inside the parliament for secular movements to propose new bills and laws allowing NGO formulations and allowing freedoms inside the country. So that's the main fear, not the social conservative agenda, but the rather anti-democratic political agenda that scares the secularists in Egypt. Going back to your question, what would I like to see? Well, I personally would prefer a secular president, but it's not up to me. It's the Egyptians' choice. And if they choose to have a more conservative Islamic president, that's their choice. However, what I would like to see is fundamental human rights secured. I would like to see a constitution that protects and respects the rights of minorities. And I doubt that that could happen in a parliament dominated by Islamists and a president that has all these conservative tendencies as well, politically speaking. So that would take me to another point, is that if Morsi wins, and that's the most likely possibility, I think the secularist movement in Egypt should just get over their whining period. They should stop moaning and they should start working again. It's not the end of the world. We still have the Constitutional Assembly to pressure for. We still have lots of work to do, and I think now is the right time to push for these things.
And Mikhail, turning to you, and on this issue that Dareen raises, the issue of the Constitution. Now, we're in the presidential election, but this is a bit of a funny situation here in Egypt, because the powers of the president, the person that they're voting for at the moment, actually remain undefined because of a tussle over who will write the new Constitution. Is this a case of putting the cart before the horse?
This will give at least opportunity to discuss and to form a good constitution in the future. So what I think what is very important, that essential part and essential division in Egyptian society is between Islamist forces and secular forces. And so in this case, what we will see, if 2 candidates coming to the second tour, Mohamed Morsi from Islamist part and Ahmed Shafiq from secular part.
I don't think Ahmed Shafiq belongs to the secular camp at all. I think he belongs more to the military, non-secular camp.
Okay, we're running out of time here. Maybe I'll just turn back for a comment from Ian over the line in Cairo. Ian, what do you suggest our listeners look out for as we head up to the voting in the runoff next month?
Well, first of all, we need to get a final result from the first round. And while we've been speaking, I'm seeing, more results coming in. And according to one source, Shafiq has now been overtaken in second place by Hamdin Sabahi, the Nasser's candidate. So I think we're going to have to be a bit patient and wait at least until the end of the day when there are more results in, or tomorrow. I think it can be clear, we've all agreed too, that Morsi is likely to be in the runoff. Shafiq, Sabahi, it's going to be a divided race. Whoever wins the Egyptian presidency on the 16th and 17th of June, we should know definitely by the 21st of that month, will face huge problems. An Egyptian friend said to me, the new president will be walking through a minefield. The domestic political scene, the economic situation, international pressures, the question of Israel that has been raised, there's an awful lot to worry about. And there's also, as we've mentioned in passing, there has to be a constitution agreed. This is a president who will be elected without knowing what his powers are. That president has to manage a complex triangular relationship, first of all with the army, who remain the most powerful force in the country. They are the state, and they have allowed these elections to take place. And the parliament, which is dominated by Islamists, which has been disappointing. So a lot is happening in a short period of time, 15 months after Mubarak's overthrow. But something very significant has changed, whether you like the result or not. And it sounds as though a lot of people are going to be unhappy with the choice of president. This is something that has never happened before in Egypt. And I think you have to see it as a long process over years, over many years perhaps, before this country has the sort of multi-party politics where people get used to rotation of government and elections that function and don't generate a huge crisis. But Egypt has a long way to go down that path, and this is only the beginning.
Mustafa, we're running out of time here, but these issues, the incomplete constitution, this political minefield, do you, like Ian, see huge problems on the horizon?
Definitely. Look, the Muslim Brotherhood have been trying to get into power since King Farouk, and I think now they think they won, and we live in a dilemma because of their behavior since the revolution. If they have not led that campaign when the referendum for the constitution was happening, and we managed to have a new constitution, but of course they went against that. We run our own debate here in London, in England, and over 90% of the people said no to the amendment of the constitution. So that can show you their influence in the market. We are in a dilemma. I just hope that we will not be in a bigger and more dilemma after the election. I just hope that they put Egypt in their eyes, and the Egyptian people hopes and expectation could be met. I'm not expecting that now and quickly, but we just hope we're not going to be in more dilemma after the election.
Okay, that was Mostafa Ragab, director of the community centre Egyptian House, London, describing a dilemma over the success of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt's elections. I was also joined by Dareen Khalifa, an Egyptian human rights campaigner, Ian Black, the Middle East editor for The Guardian, over the line from Cairo, and Mikhail Roshin, a research fellow at the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl. Stay tuned for the latest update of what's making headlines around the world.